Chapter 1. A Perfect Getaway. John and Emily had always been the couple others envied. At least that's how it appeared on the surface. From the outside, they were the picture of marital bliss, successful careers, a beautiful home, and a love story that friends and family admired. But like all things that glitter, there was a tarnish beneath their seemingly perfect life. After 10 years of marriage, their relationship had settled into a routine, comfortable, but lacking the spark that had once defined their early years together. The passionate exchanges, the spontaneous adventures, and the deep conversations that had once filled their days had gradually faded, replaced by the mundane demands of everyday life. They were still affectionate, still cared for each other deeply, but there was an undercurrent of dissatisfaction that neither of them was willing to confront. Both feared that acknowledging the problem might shatter the fragile peace they had built. Emily, with her sharp intellect and unwavering determination, had thrown herself into her career. She was a lawyer, respected and admired by her peers, but the long hours and high-pressure cases had taken a toll. She often came home late, too exhausted to engage in anything more than small talk. John, who had once been her biggest cheerleader, began to feel like a secondary character in his own marriage. John, on the other hand, was an architect with a creative soul. He had always been the dreamer in the relationship, the one who believed in grand gestures and romantic ideals. But over time, he had buried his dreams under the weight of reality, deadlines, clients, and the slow, creeping realization that his marriage wasn't what it once was. He missed the way Emily used to look at him, with eyes full of love and admiration. Now those looks were rare, replaced by tired smiles and distracted glances. It was Emily who suggested the vacation to the Amalfi Coast. They hadn't taken a trip together in years, not since before the demands of their careers had fully consumed them. The idea of escaping to a place where the sun always seemed to shine, where the air was filled with the scent of lemon trees and the sound of the sea was appealing. John agreed, hoping that the change of scenery might rekindle something between them, even if it was just a fleeting moment of the closeness they once shared. As they arrived at their hotel, John couldn't help but be captivated by the beauty of the place. The hotel was perched on a cliffside, offering a panoramic view of the sparkling turquoise waters below. The cliffs were draped in lush greenery, with vibrant flowers spilling over stone walls and winding paths. The sun, already low in the sky, cast a golden hue over everything, making it seem as though they had stepped into a dream. It was the kind of place that begged for romance, where every corner seemed to hold the promise of something magical. Yet even in this paradise, the distance between them was palpable. They walked through the hotel's open-air lobby in silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Emily's face was set in a determined expression, as if she was trying to will herself into relaxation. John, ever observant, noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes darted around as if searching for something to distract her from her thoughts. When they reached their room, Emily excused herself to freshen up, leaving John alone on the balcony. He leaned against the railing, taking in the view. The sea stretched out before him, its surface shimmering in the fading light. Boats bobbed gently in the water, and the sound of waves crashing against the rocks below filled the air. It was beautiful, serene, but it did little to calm the unease that had settled in John's chest. Feeling restless, John suggested that they explore the town on their own for a bit. He thought that some time apart might help them clear their heads and perhaps reignite the spark later when they met up again for dinner. Emily agreed, a little too quickly, as if the idea of being alone was a relief rather than a disappointment. As John walked through the cobblestone streets of the town, he tried to lose himself in the charm of his surroundings. The buildings were painted in warm, pastel colors, with shutters thrown open to let in the evening breeze. Bougainvillea climbed up the walls, their vibrant pink and purple blossoms adding splashes of color to the scene. The scent of freshly baked bread and roasting garlic wafted from nearby restaurants, mingling with the salty tang of the sea air. But despite the beauty around him, John couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He found himself wandering aimlessly, his thoughts drifting back to Emily and the widening gap between them. He wanted to fix things, to find a way back to the closeness they once shared, but he didn't know how. every attempt to reach out to her seemed to fall flat, as if there was an invisible barrier between them that neither could break through. It was during this aimless wandering that John spotted her. She was standing alone by the edge of a small, secluded beach, her silhouette framed by the setting sun. The light caught the strands of her long, dark hair, making them shimmer like strands of silk. She wore a simple white dress that clung to her figure, the fabric fluttering in the breeze. There was something ethereal about her, as if she didn't quite belong to the world around her. John felt an immediate pull toward her, a fascination that he couldn't quite explain. It wasn't just her beauty, though that was undeniable. There was something in the way she stood, in the way she seemed completely at ease with herself and her surroundings, that drew him in. He hesitated for a moment, aware of how ridiculous it was to be so captivated by a stranger, but then he found himself walking toward her as if drawn by an invisible force. As he approached, the woman turned to face him, and John felt a jolt of surprise. Her eyes, a deep, penetrating blue, seemed to pierce right through him, as if she could see every thought in his mind. Her gaze was steady, unwavering, and John felt a strange mix of curiosity and unease. It was as if she knew him, as if she had been expecting him. "Beautiful evening, isn't it?" she said, her voice smooth and melodic, with a faint accent that John couldn't place. "Yes, it is," John replied, a little too quickly. He was suddenly aware of how nervous he felt, an unfamiliar sensation for someone usually so composed. "I was just taking in the view." "It's breathtaking, isn't it?" she said, turning her gaze back to the horizon. "This place has a way of making you forget about everything else." John nodded, though he wasn't sure if she was talking about the view or something else entirely. He introduced himself, and she smiled, a slow, knowing smile that made John's heart skip a beat. "Sophia," she said, extending her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, John." They shook hands, and John was struck by how soft her skin was, how firm her grip. There was an undeniable chemistry between them, a tension that crackled in the air like static electricity. Their conversation started innocently enough, small talk about the beauty of the coast, the food, the culture. But underneath the words, there was an unspoken understanding that this meeting wasn't entirely innocent. As they talked, John found himself increasingly drawn to Sophia. She was charming, intelligent, and had a magnetic presence that was impossible to ignore. There was an air of mystery about her, as if she was deliberately holding something back, and it only made John more intrigued. He wanted to know more about her, to understand what had brought her to this place and why she seemed so interested in him. But more than that, John was fascinated by the way Sophia made him feel. She was attentive, engaged, and seemed genuinely interested in what he had to say, something he hadn't felt from Emily in a long time. He knew it was dangerous, knew that he was treading on thin ice, but he couldn't bring himself to walk away. There was something exhilarating about being in Sophia's presence, something that made him feel alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Sophia turned to John with a playful glint in her eye. "Would you like to join me for a drink?" she asked, her tone casual, but with an undertone that suggested more than just friendly conversation. John hesitated, aware of the implications, but the allure was too strong to resist. He nodded, feeling a thrill of excitement mixed with a pang of guilt. "Sure," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. They walked together along the beach, the sound of the waves accompanying their footsteps. As they reached a small, secluded bar tucked away from the main street, John felt a sense of inevitability. He knew he was crossing a line, but at that moment he didn't care. The pull toward Sophia was too strong, too intoxicating to ignore. Inside the bar, the atmosphere was intimate, with dim lighting and soft music playing in the background. They found a table in the corner, away from prying eyes, and ordered drinks. As they talked, the conversation grew more personal, more charged with unspoken desire. Sophia leaned in closer, her eyes never leaving John's, and he could feel the heat between them rising. There was no denying it now. This was more than just a casual encounter. The tension had shifted from subtle to palpable, and John was acutely aware of the dangerous path he was on. But with Sophia sitting across from him, her beauty amplified by the flickering candlelight, The Rational, Chapter 2. The Seduction. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky exploded in hues of orange, pink, and deep purple, casting a warm golden glow over the town. The streets of the Amalfi Coast were alive with the sound of laughter, clinking glasses, and the distant strum of a guitar from a nearby cafe. It was as if the entire world had been designed to seduce the senses, to draw out the hidden desires that lay dormant in the hearts of those who wandered its winding paths. John felt a strange mixture of excitement and apprehension as Sophia turned to him, her eyes reflecting the last light of the day. There was a soft smile playing on her lips, one that hinted at secrets and unspoken promises. She was magnetic, and John found himself unable to look away. "Would you like to join me for a drink?" Sophia asked, her voice smooth and inviting, yet carrying an edge that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. John hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He knew that to accept her offer was to step into dangerous territory, a place where the lines of right and wrong blurred. But the pull was too strong, the allure of the unknown too tempting to resist. "Sure," he replied, his voice betraying none of the turmoil within. It was as if he was watching himself from a distance, detached from the man who was making these choices. The evening air was warm, wrapping around them like a comforting blanket as they walked through the lively streets. The scent of lemon trees and sea salt filled the air, mingling with the aroma of fresh seafood and wine that wafted from the nearby restaurants. The town was bustling, yet it felt as though they were in a world of their own, separate from the noise and the people around them. Sophia led John to a small, intimate bar tucked away from the main streets, its entrance barely noticeable behind a curtain of cascading bougainvillea. The bar was a hidden gem, its interior dimly lit by flickering candles and strings of fairy lights. The walls were lined with dark wood, and the ceiling was low, creating a cozy, almost secretive atmosphere. It was the kind of place where lovers might meet in the shadows, where whispered confessions and stolen glances could go unnoticed. They found a table in the corner, away from prying eyes, where they could talk without interruption. The waiter, a young man with a knowing smile, brought them a bottle of wine and 2 glasses, leaving them to their privacy. The moment he was gone, Sophia poured the wine with a practiced elegance, handing John a glass with a teasing smile. "To new acquaintances," she said, raising her glass. "To new acquaintances," John echoed, clinking his glass against hers. The wine was rich and smooth, its warmth spreading through him with each sip. As they talked, the conversation flowed easily, but there was an underlying tension that made every word feel charged with meaning. Sophia's flirtation became more direct as the evening wore on, her body language speaking louder than her words. She leaned in closer as she spoke, her shoulder brushing against his, sending a shiver down his spine. Her fingers, delicate and cool, found their way to his hand, tracing small, deliberate circles on his skin. John felt himself drawn deeper into her web with each passing moment. The thrill of being desired by someone so beautiful, so confident, clouded his judgment. Sophia's gaze never left his, her eyes locking him in place, making it impossible for him to look away. It was as if she had cast a spell on him, and he was helpless to resist. She spoke with a confidence that both intrigued and intimidated him, her words laced with double meanings and subtle invitations. John, usually so self-assured, found himself stumbling over his responses, unsure of how to navigate this new territory. It was thrilling and terrifying all at once. At one point, Sophia leaned in so close that John could feel her breath on his neck, warm and tantalizing. Her voice was a whisper, low and husky, as she uttered the words that would unravel him completely. "I want you," she said, her lips brushing against his ear. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that crushed any remaining defenses John had left. In that moment, everything else faded away, his marriage, his vows, the life he had built with Emily. All that existed was the overwhelming desire that coursed through him, ignited by Sophia's touch, her words, her very presence. He knew it was wrong, knew that he was standing on the precipice of a decision that could change everything, but the temptation was overwhelming. Without another word, they left the bar, the door closing behind them with a finality that echoed in John's mind. The night was alive with possibilities, the stars above twinkling like a million silent witnesses to the choice he was about to make. Sophia led him through the narrow, winding streets, her hand gripping his with a firmness that left no room for second thoughts. They arrived at Sophia's hotel, a charming boutique place with ivy climbing its stone walls. The lobby was empty, the only sound the soft ticking of a clock on the wall. As they ascended the stairs to her room, John's heart pounded in his chest, each step feeling like a point of no return. Inside her room, the air was thick with anticipation. The space was small but elegantly furnished, with a large bed dominating the room, its white sheets pristine and inviting. Sophia didn't waste any time. As soon as the door closed behind them, she turned to him, her eyes dark with desire, and pulled him into a kiss. The kiss was hungry, desperate, a release of all the tension that had been building between them. John felt himself give in completely, surrendering to the moment with a fervor that surprised even him. Sophia's hands were everywhere, pulling him closer, as if she couldn't get enough of him. They moved together in a frantic rhythm, their clothes discarded carelessly on the floor as they made their way to the bed. The passion between them was intense, fueled by the forbidden nature of their actions. Every touch, every kiss, felt like a spark igniting a fire that consumed them both. It was a heady mix of lust and guilt, the thrill of doing something so utterly wrong heightening the pleasure, but as quickly as it began, it was over. The room, once filled with the sounds of their passion, fell silent. John lay on the bed, his breath heavy, his mind reeling from what had just happened. Sophia, however, was already pulling away, the warmth that had drawn him to her now replaced by a cool detachment. She dressed quickly, her movements efficient and devoid of the sensuality that had captivated him earlier. She didn't look at him as she gathered her things, her focus entirely on leaving. It was as if a switch had been flipped, and the woman who had seduced him so thoroughly was now a stranger. John watched in stunned silence as Sophia slipped her shoes on, her back to him. He wanted to say something, to reach out and stop her, but the words caught in his throat. There was a gnawing sense of guilt and shame beginning to creep in, replacing the thrill that had consumed him just moments before. Finally, Sophia turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Goodbye, John," she said, her voice devoid of the warmth and flirtation it had held earlier. There was no affection, no hint of the connection they had shared, only a cold finality. Before he could respond, she was gone, the door clicking shut behind her with a sound that echoed in the empty room. John was left alone in the aftermath, the silence pressing down on him like a weight. The thrill had vanished, leaving only the harsh reality of what he had done. He lay there for a long time, staring up at the ceiling, the events of the evening replaying in his mind. The guilt was overwhelming, a heavy burden that settled in his chest and refused to let go. He had betrayed Emily, crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and for what? A fleeting moment of passion with a woman he barely knew. The room, once filled with the allure of the forbidden, now felt cold and empty. The reality of his actions was beginning to sink in, and with it came the full weight of the consequences he would soon have to face. Chapter 3. The Confession. The night weighed heavily on John as he walked back to the hotel, the cobblestone streets of the Amalfi Coast now devoid of their earlier charm. Each step felt like a burden, the echoes of his footsteps a constant reminder of the irreversible mistake he had just committed. The vibrant nightlife, the laughter, the music, all of it seemed to mock him, as if the entire town was aware of his transgression and was celebrating his downfall. His mind was a whirlwind of regret and self-loathing. The thrill he had felt with Sophia had evaporated, leaving behind a gnawing sense of guilt that gnawed at his insides like a relentless parasite. His stomach churned with nausea, and he could taste the bile rising in his throat. Every breath felt labored, as if the air itself was condemning him, refusing to offer any solace. When John finally reached the hotel, the once luxurious surroundings felt suffocating, their beauty tainted by the darkness of his actions. The grand lobby, with its marble floors and elegant chandeliers, seemed cold and unwelcoming. The night receptionist barely glanced up as he passed by, yet John couldn't shake the irrational fear that somehow she knew what he had done. He reached the door of their suite and hesitated, his hand hovering over the doorknob. Inside, Emily was likely asleep, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to tear through their lives. The thought of her lying there, peaceful and trusting, sent a fresh wave of nausea crashing over him. How could he face her now? How could he lie down beside her, knowing what he had done? Summoning the last vestiges of his courage, John turned the doorknob and stepped inside. The room was dark, the only light coming from the sliver of moonlight that filtered through the curtains. Emily was asleep, her breathing soft and steady, the rise and fall of her chest a rhythm he had come to cherish over the years. She looked so serene, her face relaxed and free of the worries that plagued him. John's heart twisted painfully in his chest. He wanted to crawl into bed, to hold her close, to somehow erase the last few hours and return to the life they had before this nightmare began. But he couldn't. The weight of his betrayal was too heavy, the guilt too overwhelming. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, torn between the urge to confess everything and the desperate desire to keep it buried. Finally, unable to bear the sight of her any longer, John turned away and walked to the bathroom. He splashed cold water on his face, hoping to wash away the guilt, but it clung to him like a second skin. His reflection in the mirror was a stranger's, a man he didn't recognize, with hollow eyes and a haunted expression. The sight made him sick, and he barely made it to the toilet before he retched, his body convulsing as it expelled the remnants of his night. When the sickness subsided, John sank to the floor, his back against the cold tile, his head in his hands. He felt utterly defeated, consumed by the enormity of his actions. The memory of Sophia's touch, once electrifying, now felt like a brand, burning his skin with the shame of what he had done. He wanted to scream, to cry, to beg for forgiveness, but the words stuck in his throat, strangled by the suffocating silence of the night. The hours dragged on, each minute stretching into an eternity as John sat in the darkness, replaying the events over and over in his mind. Every detail was seared into his memory. The sound of Sophia's laughter, the taste of her lips, the feel of her body against his. He wanted to forget, to wipe it all away, but it was impossible. The images were etched into his mind, a constant reminder of his betrayal. Morning eventually came, the first light of dawn creeping into the room, casting long shadows across the floor. John hadn't slept a wink, his body exhausted but his mind too tormented to find rest. He knew he couldn't keep this a secret. The guilt was too much to bear. But the thought of telling Emily, of seeing the pain in her eyes, filled him with dread. As the sun rose higher, filling the room with its golden light, Emily began to stir. She turned over in bed, her eyes fluttering open, a sleepy smile on her lips as she saw John standing by the window. But her smile faltered when she noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the drawn look on his face. "John?" she asked, her voice thick with concern. "Are you okay?" John's heart clenched at the sound of her voice, so full of love and worry. He couldn't do this anymore. He couldn't keep the truth from her, not when it was tearing him apart inside. But how could he begin to tell her? How could he destroy the woman he loved with the truth of his betrayal? Emily sat up, her eyes searching his face for answers. "John, what's wrong? You're scaring me." He turned to face her, his legs feeling like lead as he walked over to the bed. The words were stuck in his throat, choking him, but he forced them out, knowing that this was something he had to do. "Emily, I need to tell you something," he began, his voice trembling. He could see the fear in her eyes, the way her breath caught in her throat as she waited for him to continue. His voice cracked, and he had to swallow the lump in his throat before he could go on. "I did something terrible last night." Emily's face went pale, the color draining from her cheeks as the words hung in the air between them. She didn't say anything, just stared at him, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. John couldn't meet her gaze. He looked down at his hands at the way they were trembling and forced himself to continue. "I met someone, a woman. Her name was Sophia. We talked and things got out of hand. I'm so sorry, Emily. I didn't mean for it to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily didn't move, didn't speak. She just sat there, staring at him as if trying to process the words he had just said. John could see the hurt beginning to form in her eyes, the way her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "John, how could you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The pain in her voice was like a knife to his heart, twisting deeper with each word. "How could you do this to me?" John's chest felt tight, like he could barely breathe. He wanted to reach out to her, to take her in his arms and beg for forgiveness, but he knew that would be the wrong thing to do. This was his fault, his betrayal, and he had no right to seek comfort from the woman he had just shattered. "I don't know," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I wasn't thinking. I was stupid and selfish, and I let myself get caught up in something I never should have. But Emily, please believe me when I say I never wanted to hurt you. I love you, and I'm so sorry." Emily turned away from him, her body trembling as she fought to hold back the tears. She brought her hand to her mouth as if trying to keep herself from crying out in pain. The room was heavy with the weight of what had just been confessed, the reality of John's betrayal settling in like a dark cloud. John stood there, helpless, watching the woman he loved more than anything in the world break before his eyes. He wanted to do something, anything, to make it right, but he knew there was no fixing this. The damage was done, and now they both had to live with the consequences. Finally, Emily spoke, her voice cold and distant, like she was speaking to a stranger. "Get out." John's heart sank. "Emily, please, get out," she screamed, her voice breaking as the tears finally spilled over. "I don't want to see you. I don't want to hear you. Just get out." The finality in her words left no room for argument. John nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat as he turned and walked out of the room. The door closed behind him with a quiet click, the sound echoing in the silence of the hallway. John leaned against the wall, his legs threatening to give out from under him. He felt numb, hollow, like all the life had been drained from him. The guilt that had been eating away at him all night now turned into a deep, crushing despair. He had confessed, and in doing so, he had destroyed the woman he loved. Inside the room, Emily collapsed onto the bed, her body racked with sobs. The pain was overwhelming, like her heart was being ripped apart. She clutched at the sheets, trying to ground herself as the reality of what had happened sank in. The man she had trusted, the man she had built her life with, had been unfaithful. He had betrayed her in the worst possible way, and the pain was unbearable. She felt like she was drowning, suffocating under the weight of her own grief. But even as the tears flowed, a cold, calculated part of her mind began to stir. John had hurt her, shattered her world, and she wanted him to feel the same pain she was feeling. She wanted him to suffer, to understand the magnitude of his mistake. The idea of revenge took root in her mind, a dark seed that began to grow, fed by the hurt and anger that churned within her. She didn't know how or when, but she knew she would make him pay. She would find a way to make him feel the same agony that was tearing her apart. As the sobs subsided, Emily wiped her tears away, her resolve hardening. She had loved John with all her heart, but now that love was tainted by the bitter taste of betrayal. She would never be the same, and neither would he. Chapter 4. A Plan for Revenge. The days following John's confession were a blur of pain, anger, and silence. Emily withdrew into herself, her mind consumed with thoughts of revenge. The betrayal she felt was like a festering wound, raw and unrelenting. She replayed John's words over and over in her head, each time feeling the sting of his infidelity more acutely. It wasn't just the act itself that hurt, it was the realization that the man she had loved and trusted for so long had been capable of such a betrayal. At first, Emily considered the obvious options: leaving John, having an affair of her own, or even ruining his career. The idea of walking away from their marriage seemed like a form of justice, but it felt hollow. Why should she be the one to leave everything behind when he was the one who had broken their vows? Having an affair seemed equally unsatisfying. It would make her no better than John, and the thought of giving herself to another man out of spite felt degrading. Ruining his career was tempting, but it wouldn't inflict the kind of personal emotional pain she wanted him to feel. No, None of these options seemed to be enough. She wanted something deeper, something that would cut him to his core, the way he had cut her. She wanted him to suffer, to truly understand the depth of the hurt he had caused. She wanted him to feel as powerless and broken as she did. Then, an idea began to take shape in her mind. It was dark, twisted, and perfectly suited to the pain she was feeling. What if she made him believe that she had forgiven him? What if she let him think that they could move past this, that there was hope for their marriage? And then, when he was at his most vulnerable, when he thought they were truly happy again, she would crush him. The thought of watching the hope drain from his eyes, of seeing him realize that he had been played, filled her with a grim satisfaction. Emily decided that this was the path she would take. She would play the long game, luring John back into a false sense of security, making him fall in love with her all over again, only to destroy him when he least expected it. It was a cold, calculated plan, but the pain inside her had turned her heart to stone. She felt no guilt, no hesitation. John had made his bed, and now he would lie in it. The first step was to pretend to forgive him. This was the hardest part, requiring her to summon every ounce of strength she had to act as if she could move past his betrayal. She began by slowly reintroducing herself into his life, allowing him to approach her cautiously, like a wounded animal unsure of its surroundings. The tension between them was thick, every conversation laced with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. But Emily was patient, carefully choosing her moments, planting seeds of hope in John's mind while keeping her true intentions hidden. One evening, after days of strained silence, Emily finally broke the ice. She found John sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the television, his face etched with worry and regret. The sight of him like this, so vulnerable and desperate, would have once filled her with empathy, but now it only fueled her resolve. "John," she said softly, standing in the doorway. He looked up, his eyes wide with surprise and a glimmer of hope. "Emily, She held up a hand to silence him. "Let me speak first." She walked over to the couch and sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders brushed, a gesture that was not lost on him. She could feel the tension in his body, the way his muscles tensed as he waited for her next words. "I've been thinking a lot," she began, her voice calm and measured, "about us, about what happened, and I've come to a decision." She paused, letting the suspense build, watching the anxiety flicker in his eyes. John swallowed hard, his voice trembling. "Whatever it is, Emily, I'll accept it. I just want you to know how sorry I am, how much I regret—" "Stop," she interrupted, placing a hand on his knee. The touch was light, almost gentle, and it made him freeze in place. "I'm not here to rehash what happened. I'm here to tell you that I want to try. For us, for our marriage." The relief that washed over John was palpable. His shoulders sagged, and he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Emily, I can't tell you how much that means to me. I'll do whatever it takes, I swear. I'll make this right." She forced a small, sad smile, one that she knew would tug at his heartstrings. "I'm not saying it's going to be easy, John. Trust has been broken, and that's not something that can be fixed overnight. But I believe in our marriage, and I believe we can get through this. We just need to take it one step at a time." John nodded vigorously, his eyes shining with gratitude and renewed determination. "I'll do anything, Emily. I promise you I'll never hurt you again." Emily nodded, keeping her expression neutral, though inside she felt a sick satisfaction. He was falling right into her trap. "We'll take it slow," she said, "and we'll see where it goes. But we have to be honest with each other, no more secrets." "Of course," John agreed quickly. "No more secrets." Emily allowed herself to relax into the role she had chosen to play. Over the next few weeks, she began to slowly rekindle their romance, carefully orchestrating moments that would rebuild John's trust in her forgiveness. She planned everything meticulously, from the way she spoke to him with a mix of vulnerability and strength, to the small gestures of affection that she doled out sparingly, making them all the more precious. They started going on dates again, just like they used to. It was almost as if they were courting each other for the first time. Emily chose locations that held sentimental value, a small cafe where they had shared their first kiss, a quiet park where they had spent lazy Sunday afternoons. Each outing was carefully designed to evoke memories of happier times, making John believe that they were slowly but surely finding their way back to each other. Emily watched as John's guard began to lower, the guilt and tension that had gripped him for weeks slowly melting away. He was more attentive than he had been in years, constantly seeking ways to please her, to show her how much he cared. He would surprise her with flowers, cook her favorite meals, and spend hours talking with her about their future, as if he were a man reborn, desperate to make amends for his past mistakes. And Emily played her part perfectly. She smiled at his gestures, thanked him with soft kisses, and even initiated intimate moments, though her heart was not in them. Each time they were together, she felt a cold detachment, a sense of going through the motions without truly feeling anything. But John didn't notice. He was too consumed with his own relief, too eager to believe that their marriage was on the mend. They took weekend trips together, just the two of them, exploring new places and rediscovering old favorites. On the surface, it seemed like they were a couple in love, rekindling the spark that had once defined their relationship. John was relaxed, happy even, his eyes no longer clouded with guilt, but instead shining with hope for their future. They began discussing plans for the years ahead, vacations they wanted to take, renovations they dreamed of making to their home, even the possibility of renewing their vows. John was all in, completely convinced that they had turned a corner, that their marriage was stronger than ever. He let his guard down completely, blissfully unaware that Emily was carefully laying the groundwork for his eventual downfall. Each time John expressed his gratitude for her forgiveness, for her willingness to try again, Emily would smile and say all the right things. She spoke of love, of second chances, of how they were stronger together than apart. And John believed every word. He was so desperate for redemption, so eager to believe that he had been given a second chance, that he never once questioned her sincerity. Emily took her time, savoring each step of her plan. She wanted John to be fully invested, to be so deeply in love with her again that when the moment came, the devastation would be complete. She wanted him to feel the same helplessness, the same soul-crushing despair that she had felt when he had confessed his affair. And so she continued to bide her time, playing the role of the forgiving wife, all the while knowing that the day of reckoning was coming. It was a slow, methodical process, one that required patience and precision. But Emily was more than willing to wait. The longer it took, the sweeter the revenge would be. Chapter 5. The Revenge. The evening had started like any other in their recent routine, a dinner at home, followed by a quiet night of television. John was in a good mood, buoyed by the recent sense of normalcy and the hope that their relationship was healing. Emily had been playing her role perfectly, and he had begun to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could move past the hurt and rebuild their life together. As they finished their meal, Emily suggested they have a nightcap in the living room. John agreed, still feeling a warm sense of contentment from their recent outings and the seemingly renewed connection between them. They settled on the couch, Emily with a glass of wine and John with a scotch. The soft lighting and comfortable setting made it feel like just another evening of rediscovered intimacy. But Emily had other plans. She had carefully orchestrated this moment, choosing it with the precision of a master chess player. She had spent days perfecting her timing, waiting for the exact right moment to strike. Tonight was the night she had chosen to unveil the full extent of her deception and make John face the consequences of his actions. As they sipped their drinks and chatted idly, Emily's demeanor shifted. Her casual conversation grew more serious, her tone more deliberate. John noticed the change, but attributed it to a moment of introspection, or perhaps a deeper conversation she wanted to have. He welcomed it, thinking it was a sign of their growing closeness. Suddenly, Emily put down her glass and turned to face John directly. The look in her eyes was cold, resolute. John's smile faltered as he sensed the shift in her mood. "John," Emily began, her voice steady but laced with an underlying intensity, "there's something we need to talk about." John's heart skipped a beat. He had learned to recognize the signs of a serious conversation, and he braced himself, trying to read her expression. "What's wrong, Emily?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. Emily took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "You remember when you confessed to me about Sophia? How you told me everything? How you said you were willing to do whatever it took to make things right?" John nodded, his throat suddenly dry. "Yes, of course. I remember." Emily's gaze was unflinching. "I want you to know that I have never really forgiven you. Not completely." John's heart sank, the color draining from his face. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The room seemed to close in around him, the air thick with tension. Emily continued, her voice growing more intense as she recounted every detail of the affair. "You think we were healing, that we were moving past this, but you're wrong. I've been playing a role, John. I've been waiting for the perfect moment to reveal the truth, to make you suffer the way I have." John's eyes widened, shock and confusion etched on his face. "Emily, Emily held up a hand, silencing him. "Let me finish. I've spent days, weeks plotting this. You have no idea the extent of the pain you caused me. Every time you spoke about our future, every time you tried to make things right, I was seething inside. I was planning my revenge." John's face fell, his shoulders slumping as if a heavy weight had been placed upon them. The look of disbelief and devastation was palpable. He could hardly comprehend the gravity of what Emily was saying. "Emily, please," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "I thought we were—" Emily interrupted him again, her voice rising with emotion. "You thought we were what? That everything was magically fixed because you were sorry? You have no idea what it's been like for me. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and utterly crushed. You made me feel like our entire marriage was a lie." John looked down, unable to meet her gaze. Tears of frustration and regret welled up in his eyes. He had believed that they were on the mend, that their love could overcome the betrayal. But now, faced with Emily's raw, unfiltered anger, he realized just how deeply he had hurt her. Emily watched as John crumbled before her, his expression one of utter defeat. For a moment she felt a pang of sympathy, a flicker of the love she once had for him. It was an unexpected reaction, a sign of her own vulnerability amidst her calculated revenge. She saw him not just as the man who had betrayed her, but as a person who had been overwhelmed by beauty and desire, leading him to make a grievous mistake. Seeing him like this, broken and ashamed, Emily began to understand the power that beauty and desire could wield. John had been weak, swayed by an irresistible allure that had clouded his judgment. He had been caught in a moment of weakness, a moment that had cost him everything. Emily realized that while his actions had been unforgivable, his weakness had made him human, flawed and susceptible. As the silence stretched between them, Emily's resolve softened slightly. She had wanted him to suffer, to feel the pain she had endured, but seeing him in such a state of anguish, she couldn't help but feel a measure of pity. She saw the depth of his remorse and the genuine agony that now mirrored her own. The confrontation left both of them in a state of emotional wreckage. Emily had accomplished what she set out to do. She had made John face the full weight of his betrayal, but the cost was also a deeper understanding of her own feelings and the complexities of human weakness. For a moment, revenge and love intertwined, leaving Emily to grapple with the true nature of her emotions. Chapter 6. The Aftermath. In the days that followed the explosive confrontation, Emily found herself grappling with a profound sense of emptiness. The catharsis she had anticipated, the satisfaction of having made John feel the full weight of his betrayal, was nowhere to be found. Instead, a deep void had settled within her, an unsettling realization that the revenge she had sought had not provided the closure she had hoped for. The aftermath of their confrontation was a mix of silent tension and awkward conversations. Emily's home was filled with the echoes of unspoken words and unresolved emotions. She would catch herself staring out of windows, lost in thought, her mind drifting to the painful memories of what had transpired. The house, once a symbol of their shared life, now felt like a cold, empty shell. The love and warmth that had once filled their space seemed to have dissipated, leaving behind a stark, uncomfortable silence. Emily's daily routine became a series of mechanical tasks. She cooked meals with a distracted air, cleaned the house with little enthusiasm, and went through the motions of life without truly engaging. Each day felt like a slow progression through a fog of unresolved feelings. The weight of her actions pressed heavily on her chest, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had been lost between them. John, meanwhile, was consumed by a profound sense of guilt and regret. The realization of his betrayal had hit him harder than he had anticipated. He had hoped that Emily's forgiveness would come with time, but the reality of her anger and the severity of her revenge left him in a state of deep reflection. Every corner of their home seemed to remind him of his failure. He would sit alone in the evenings, staring at the empty spaces where their laughter and conversations used to be. The once vibrant and optimistic man was now a shadow of himself, his face lined with sorrow and his eyes carrying the weight of remorse. He tried to reach out to Emily, to offer apologies and assurances, but his words felt hollow even to him. He knew that he had shattered their marriage, and no amount of remorse could undo the damage he had caused. His attempts to make amends felt futile, and he grappled with the haunting question of whether their relationship could ever be repaired. As the days turned into weeks, Emily began to see John's suffering more clearly. His every gesture, every attempt to mend what was broken, spoke of his genuine regret. She saw him struggling with the consequences of his actions, his desperate attempts to regain her trust, and his unwillingness to give up on their marriage. It became evident that his regret was not just a fleeting emotion, but a deep-seated realization of the gravity of his mistakes. Emily watched John with a mix of detached curiosity and growing empathy. His pain was palpable, and it was clear that he was not merely apologizing out of obligation, but out of a profound sense of remorse. She began to question her own actions, wondering if the revenge she had exacted had truly brought her the healing she had sought. Instead of the satisfaction she had expected, she was left with a deeper sense of loss and confusion. In the quiet moments, when the house was still and the world outside seemed distant, Emily found herself reflecting on the nature of forgiveness and healing. She had sought to make John feel the same pain she had endured, but now she questioned whether that pain had really brought her closer to peace. The bitterness she had once felt was giving way to a more complex understanding of their relationship and her own emotions. One evening, as they sat across from each other at the dinner table in a strained silence, Emily looked at John and saw the depths of his sorrow. His eyes, once full of hope and determination, were now filled with a quiet resignation. She realized that the revenge she had sought had not healed her wounds, it had only deepened them, making her question the path she had taken. "John," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I've been thinking." John looked up, his expression a mixture of hope and apprehension. "About what?" "About us," Emily continued. "About everything that's happened. I don't know if revenge was the answer. I thought it would make things right, but it hasn't. It's just left me feeling empty." John's face softened, a flicker of relief passing through his eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you, Emily. I'm sorry for everything I've done. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to try to make things right. I want to be the man you deserve." Emily nodded, her emotions a tangled mess of hurt and understanding. "I see that now. I see how much you regret what happened, and I realize that holding on to this anger and bitterness isn't helping either of us. Maybe we need to find a way to heal, not just for ourselves, but for each other." The conversation marked the beginning of a fragile new chapter in their relationship. It wasn't about erasing the past or pretending that nothing had happened. It was about acknowledging the pain, understanding the depth of their emotions, and finding a way to move forward. Emily knew that forgiveness would not come easily, nor would rebuilding their relationship be simple. But the realization that revenge had not provided the closure she had hoped for was the first step toward healing. In the quiet moments that followed, Emily and John began to navigate their way through the rubble of their marriage, seeking to understand and rebuild what had been lost. It was a long and uncertain journey, marked by both setbacks and small victories. But with each passing day, they worked toward finding a new path together, one that acknowledged their past while striving for a future grounded in honesty and mutual respect. Chapter 7. A Path to Forgiveness. The evening had settled into a tranquil hush, broken only by the occasional rustle of the leaves outside their window. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a gentle twilight over their home. The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation as Emily and John prepared to confront the tumultuous emotions that had lingered between them for months. They had agreed to sit down and talk, a decision that came after many weeks of awkward silence and stifled conversations. It was a chance to confront their feelings, address the damage done, and, hopefully, find a path forward. The weight of their unresolved issues was palpable, hanging in the air like a dense fog. The living room was dimly lit, the soft glow of the lamp casting a warm but somber light. They sat across from each other on the couch, the space between them feeling both intimate and intimidating. Emily's eyes were red from the strain of the past months, and John's face was etched with an expression of deep remorse. There was an unspoken understanding that this conversation was their last attempt to mend what had been broken. Emily took a deep breath, her voice trembling as she began to speak. "John, I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, about everything that's happened and about us." She paused, her gaze dropping to her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I realize now that seeking revenge wasn't the right approach. It only made things worse. It didn't heal my pain. It just added to it." John looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of hope and apprehension. "Emily, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I've been trying to understand how I could make it right, but I know words alone can't fix everything." Emily continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke from her heart. "I still love you, despite everything that's happened. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. I want to try to forgive you, not just for the sake of moving on, but because I believe there's still something worth fighting for between us." John's eyes filled with tears as he absorbed her words. He had hoped for this moment, but hearing it aloud was both a relief and a source of deep emotional pain. "Emily, I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I promise you I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you. I'll do whatever it takes to prove to you that I'm committed to making things right." The conversation was raw and emotional, a cathartic release of pent-up feelings. They both cried as they recounted the painful memories, shared their regrets, and acknowledged the love that still lingered despite the betrayal. The walls of defensiveness that had built up over the past months began to crumble, allowing them to connect on a more genuine and vulnerable level. Forgiveness didn't come easily. It was a slow and arduous process, marked by setbacks and moments of doubt. Trust had been deeply damaged, and rebuilding it required patience and consistent effort. They both knew that healing would not happen overnight, but they were determined to take it one step at a time. To facilitate their healing, Emily and John sought counseling. The sessions were often challenging as they confronted their issues and navigated the complex emotions that surfaced. They learned to communicate more effectively, expressing their needs and concerns with honesty and empathy. The therapist helped them develop strategies to rebuild trust and address the underlying issues that had contributed to their marital problems. As they worked through their sessions, Emily and John began to notice small changes in their relationship. Their conversations became more open and respectful, and they found themselves reconnecting on an emotional level. They started to rediscover the aspects of their relationship that had initially drawn them to each other, appreciating the depth of their bond. They also made an effort to spend quality time together, engaging in activities they once enjoyed. They took weekend trips, tried new hobbies, and revisited places that held special meaning for them. These experiences, though sometimes bittersweet, helped to rekindle the sense of intimacy and connection they had lost. Despite the progress they made, there were still moments of doubt and insecurity. Emily sometimes questioned whether she was truly ready to forgive and whether their marriage could ever be the same. John, too, grappled with his own fears about whether he could ever fully earn back Emily's trust. Yet through it all, they both remained committed to the journey of healing. They understood that forgiveness was not a destination, but an ongoing process that required continuous effort and understanding. Each day was a step toward rebuilding their relationship, and they approached it with a renewed sense of hope and determination. Their path to forgiveness was neither linear nor easy, but it was marked by a genuine desire to rebuild what had been broken. They faced their challenges with courage and resilience, knowing that while the road ahead was uncertain, their commitment to each other was a source of strength. In the end, their journey was a testament to the complexities of love, forgiveness, and redemption. It was a reminder that even in the face of deep hurt and betrayal, there was always a possibility for healing and growth. And as Emily and John continued to navigate their path together, they did so with a deeper understanding of each other and a renewed appreciation for the love that had weathered their trials. Chapter 8. A New Beginning. A year had passed since the tumultuous events that had tested the very foundation of John and Emily's marriage. The Amalfi Coast, a place once associated with betrayal and heartbreak, now called to them with the promise of renewal and reconciliation. Their return was not just a physical journey, but a symbolic one, a way to confront their past and embrace the future they had fought so hard to rebuild. As their plane descended toward the coast, John and Emily gazed out the window at the familiar landscape. The rugged cliffs and turquoise waters were bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, casting a warm glow over the scenery that had once been marred by their pain. This time the view was different, full of hope rather than regret. They checked into the same hotel where their story had taken a dramatic turn. The place had been freshly renovated, yet the ambiance remained enchanting. The scent of salt water mingled with the aroma of blooming flowers from the hotel garden, creating a calming backdrop as they settled into their room. Their first evening on the Amalfi Coast was spent walking along the beach where John had met Sophia. The sand was cool beneath their feet, and the rhythmic sound of the waves crashing against the shore was soothing. They held hands, their fingers entwined, as if to signify their unity and the strength of their renewed bond. The beach was bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, the sky a canvas of deep oranges, pinks, and purples. Emily glanced at John, a tender smile on her lips. The years of pain and heartache had led them to this moment, and as they walked together, there was a sense of calm and peace between them. They stopped to admire the view, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting a final golden light over the water. The sight was breathtaking, a stark contrast to the turmoil that had once engulfed their lives. "We made it," Emily said softly, her voice almost lost in the sound of the waves. "We're here, together." John squeezed her hand, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "It feels like we're starting fresh," he replied, "like we're finally putting the past behind us." Their journey had been fraught with challenges, temptation, revenge, and the searing pain of betrayal. But they had faced those trials head-on, working tirelessly to understand each other and rebuild their marriage. Counseling had provided them with the tools to communicate more effectively, and their shared experiences had strengthened their bond. As they stood by the water, the memory of Sophia and the events that had transpired seemed like a distant echo. The beach that had once been a place of infidelity was now a symbol of their resilience and commitment. The emotional scars remained, but they were now accompanied by a deeper understanding and a renewed appreciation for their relationship. The evening unfolded with a sense of tranquility and reflection. They dined at a quaint seaside restaurant, the same one where they had once enjoyed a romantic meal. The setting was intimate, with soft candlelight casting flickering shadows on their faces. The food was exquisite, and the ambiance was filled with a gentle, nostalgic charm. Over dinner, they reminisced about their journey, sharing their thoughts and feelings about how far they had come. Emily spoke about her struggle with forgiveness and the realization that revenge had only deepened their wounds. John reflected on his regrets and the profound impact of their reconciliation. "We've been through so much," Emily said, her eyes meeting John's. "But I think that's what makes this moment so special. We've learned from our mistakes and come out stronger." John nodded, his gaze filled with gratitude. "I know we can never erase the past, but I'm thankful for what we've learned and for the chance to start anew. I promise to cherish this second chance and work every day to show you how much you mean to me." As the evening drew to a close, they returned to their hotel room, the gentle sound of the waves providing a soothing lullaby. The room was filled with a quiet intimacy, the atmosphere a stark contrast to the emotional chaos of their previous visit. They lay together, holding each other close, the night air cool and fresh against their skin. Their journey was far from over, but they were no longer defined by their past mistakes. Instead, they had chosen to embrace their future with open hearts and a renewed commitment to each other. The Amalfi Coast, once a place of betrayal, had become a backdrop for their healing and growth. In the months and years to come, they would continue to face challenges and work through their issues, but they knew that they had the strength and resilience to overcome whatever lay ahead. Their love, tested and tempered by adversity, had emerged stronger and more profound. As they lay together, the gentle waves lapping against the shore, they understood that their marriage would never be the same as it once was. But in that acceptance, they found a new beginning, one that was built on a foundation of trust, forgiveness, and an enduring love that had weathered the storm.